My guest today is the legendary Robert Ballard, the explorer and discoverer of the Titanic. He is also known for his discovering of the German battleship Bismarck, many other ancient and modern shipwrecks around the world, including the USS Yorktown at the Battle of Midway, JFK's PT-109, the Lusitania, but more importantly, he's a world-class scientist, and so we discuss his many important discoveries that he made that include the 750-degree Fahrenheit hydrothermal vents, undersea volcanoes, black smokers, and the confirmation of the theory of plate tectonics. So we talk about how science operates and his role in shifting theory to reality in that. And he also gets personal. He talks about his life growing up in Kansas, and then the influence of his parents and his siblings and peer group and mentors and teachers and so on, and time in the Navy. And then he also talks about the loss of his son at the age of 21, and it gets pretty emotional. It was kind of hard to keep it together during that. He's just really a great guy. And he also talks personally about what it was like to have dyslexia and earn a PhD in geophysics. Pretty amazing. But he didn't discover he had dyslexia until he was 72 years old. So that's pretty interesting. So we kind of explore how people develop strategies to work around their cognitive skills or lack thereof. So he is also, since 2008, the manager of the EV Nautilus, his flagship for exploration, which is operated by the Ocean Exploration Trust and funded in part by NOAA. Among his many honors, he holds the Explorers Club Medal, the National Geographic Hubbard Medal, and the National Endowment for the Humanities Medal. So enjoy this conversation with the amazing Robert Ballard. Okay, Robert Ballard, the legendary. Thanks for coming on the show. I can't tell you what a great honor it is to speak to you.
My pleasure.
After reading your memoir, I want to retitle it. It is The Most Interesting Man in the World. Do you remember those Dos Equis commercials?
Actually, I have. You're not the first.
Oh, no, really?
I
thought I invented
analogy. That. Well, no, I mean, I got that from a couple other people as well. So
here's my lines for you. Here's my lines for you. Sharks have a week dedicated to him. Bigfoot takes pictures of him, and they aren't blurry. Let's see. The circus ran away to join you on an expedition. You don't wear a watch because time is always on your side. Your mother has a tattoo that reads, son. If opportunity knocks and he's not home, opportunity waits for him. In a past life, he was himself, and apropos for what we do here at Skeptic, aliens ask him to abduct them. So you are the most interesting man in the world. All right. Just a little levity there. So, Robert, you've written a memoir. I always find these interesting because some long-term book project I have been working on for a long time, I've titled it How Lives Turn Out, Genes, Environment, and Luck, especially luck. And so much comes to mind in your memoir. To what extent, obviously, you're a smart guy and you inherited a lot of certain talents that worked well. But really, the action's all in the particular contingent pathways that you took. You went left instead of right, you did this instead of that, and you ended up, where you are now. So let's just kind of give us an overview with that in mind. Like, to what extent did your parents influence you, and then your siblings, peer groups, mentors, and teachers, and along the way, you got bumped this way or that way, and here you are. It could have gone some other way.
Well, I would certainly attribute it to the time. I mean, I'm a kid I was born 6 months after Pearl Harbor. I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and that was sort of the golden era. A lot of people say for certainly us guys. And I had a family situation that also had a major contribution to it, and that was the super smart brother and then a sister who was dealt a real bad deck of cards genetically. So I was in between, couldn't match my brother intellectually in school because he was not dyslexic, and I had to drag that ball and chain around, but I was able to figure out how to drag that around. But inspired by my sister, who never lost her smile, even though I would have been a really angry person if I'd gotten the genetic mix that she got at conception. It's called a transmutation, which makes a unique person. So they weren't able to figure it out because she was a one of a kind. So my family setting, certainly I had a mother who was very supportive. And then being an American, I mean, just all of these ingredients, and then luck. My brother said I was the luckiest person he ever met. I attribute some of the luck to luck and some of it going after luck, so to speak. So it was a whole blend of things. And then the big one being dyslexic, which I didn't know I was dyslexic at the time. I knew I had a different wiring diagram, but my mother just sort of blew it off. Well, you missed phonics and don't worry about it kind of thing. So I developed all sorts of coping mechanisms to get around. I got good grades. I got A's and B's, but they were more A minuses measured up against my brother's A pluses. But I just did it the old-fashioned way. I just worked really hard, and lots of different influences. Certainly the military, discipline, developing discipline, athletics, an outlet for a tremendous amount of energy because ADHD tends to be a common bedfellow with dyslexia. Just a whole bunch of things that then led me down a road where I was rewarded, where dyslexia proved to be a gift, not a disadvantage.
We should note that you didn't realize you had dyslexia until pretty late in life, right? Wasn't it age 72 you figured this out, and how did that come about?
Well, I didn't figure it out. That my daughter, who's off camera running this production facility, was diagnosed with dyslexia, and it was through her that I was introduced to dyslexia. And then I happened along an amazing book called The Dyslexic Advantage. On the jacket of my book, you'll see an endorsement by Dr. Brock and Fernetti Eide, who wrote the book, The Dyslexic Advantage. And when I read that, I must say I tears running down my face because it explained me to me for the first time. And that was really eye-opening. And I've now embraced it. I talk openly about being dyslexic because I'm on a crusade now for the dyslexics that don't have the advantages that I had growing up, particularly dyslexics of color. The prison population in the United States is dominantly dyslexics. So yeah, I feel I one of the reasons for writing the book was to reach out to those people, and I've spent a lot of time now with organizations with dyslexia. Plus, I wanted to tell the truth because I had to not tell the truth about the Titanic. I was a Cub Scout, Boy Scout, Explorer Scout, Army officer, Naval officer. I was always taught to tell the truth, and I actually had to lie about who really funded the Titanic expedition, which is sort of what everyone knows me for. And so this was sort of a cleaning my conscience up to be able to say, well, actually, I was on a top secret mission in the Cold War. So yeah, all of that.
Yeah. Do you know my friend Jack Horner, the dinosaur digger?
Of course I do. He's dyslexic.
Yes.
I've met him. He's a cool guy. Yeah. There's a lot of cool guys, but they tend to be white guys. And, we're not the full population. So we were lucky to be in an environment. I'm a middle-class kid and living in L.A. in the suburbs. Ozzie and Harriet describes my family. Smart mother, but gave up going to college to raise a family. So yeah, Jack is just like me, but we're not representative of the whole world. So yeah, we were lucky.
But I mean, I think there's an advantage in learning to think differently to solve problems, rather than seeing it as a disability. It's I think the term now is neurodiversity. There's just different ways to think about things.
Correct.
And Jack comes at dinosaur digs or theoretical problems about the evolution of dinosaurs and so on completely differently than anybody else. And
Yeah, well, that's why the vast majority of self-made millionaires are dyslexic, because we do not like the box that society put us in, particularly when when reading entered our lives. This was a disadvantage to us, so we were told we were stupid. And that can have an erosion on your spirit. That can just wear you down until you start to believe it when you shouldn't, and you develop shame and all these destructive things that affect your psychic. And a lot of people, it can take them down. Very high suicide rate amongst dyslexics. So yeah, it is a road less traveled, but it's a bumpy one.
Yes, you probably know Temple Grandin too on the autism spectrum, who again has managed
that's
to
the
do
other spectrum. Autistic kids have the very tightly packed neurons, so they hyperfocus. Non-dyslexics are sort of in the middle, and then dyslexics are out at the opposite extreme of autism, where our neurons are much wider focus. We now know that because of the seminal research and who I've been in contact right up the street at Yale is Sally Shaywitz, who and her husband Bennett, who really researched how the dyslexic mind is wired, and we have a different mind, and you can't rewire it. It is what it is, and then you need to take it down the road where it becomes an advantage.
Do you recommend to teachers and parents that catch this at a young age different kinds of classroom structures or avenues toward reading?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, oral testing, use of dyslexic font. For some kids, dyslexic font speeds up their reading. There's certain sets of dyslexics where the words are moving around. It turns out that that's the wavelength, and you can get glasses that change the wavelength. There's lots of ways of dealing with this, but first, the teachers need to recognize that 15% of their population are dyslexic. It's a big number. It's a very unrepresented minority in our country, and everyone else is coming out. Dyslexics should be coming screaming out, saying, look, we're smart, but you need to give us the tools where we can fit into your very prescribed version of teaching. I tell dyslexic kids, your job is to survive the educational process in one piece.
Well, there's so many options now online for to be an autodidact. You just teach yourself, like the Khan Academy of those short videos, or the Teaching Company, or audio books, and there's just an endless stream of things you could do and just listen to. I find I remember content detail from books better when I listen to the audio rather than read the book. I can read fine. I'm not dyslexic, but there's something about the audio.
Well, you know that, in the book I talk about my dream to be Captain Nemo. It wasn't from reading 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It was watching Disney's movie, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. By the way, Walt Disney was dyslexic, and his little saying was, if you can dream it, you can do it. So the good news is we're figuring it out, and I think we're developing ways to take advantage of this asset in our society and not view it as a thing you drug kids on and try to get them out of the game. We need to not take them out of the game, but put them in the game. And if they go down certain roads, they're extremely successful and outperform non-dyslexics.
Let's think about your life in the context of how people who study life history, theory, and generational differences. You're an early baby boomer. I'm a late baby boomer, and we're different from millennials and Gen Z and so on. Had you been born 10 years earlier or 10 years later, would that have made a difference in career paths, just in terms of what the culture was kind of primed to do for you to take advantage of?
I wouldn't want to try it again. I would not want to go down the road again at a different time and place. I'm pretty happy with where I arrived, and I wouldn't want to test fate. No, I'm just fine. Don't rewind the clock
Well,
on
but
me.
what I mean is, I was
But I
reading your memoir. I was thinking, had he been born 10 years earlier, he might have been an astronaut or something like that.
could have been. I think not. I don't really think so because being an astronaut is a club, a very small club where they have a very limited gatekeepers, and I'm sure I'd be surprised if many astronauts are dyslexic.
Oh,
I've never met one, heard of one. There may be, but I was able to go. My father said something to me young in life, and for some reason it stuck. To have 10 masters is to have none. And so I've always diversified my portfolio. You can see in the book I was living 5 different lives. That meant I had 5 different masters, and I could tell any one of the 5 go hang it up and walk away. I've always been able to walk away when I hit a wall. I try to dig under it. I try to get around it, but some walls are impenetrable to dyslexics, and I'm out. Generally, what happens is everyone tries to manage me because they want to take advantage of what I bring to the table. And I watch them start building a fence around me, and I feel like a stallion eating grass out in Wyoming, and I'm just eating the grass and watching them build that fence. And just before they put in the last section, I just take off. So I'm a moving target. I generally work in 15-year cycles, and then I retool myself. And another reason for writing the book is I'm about to start yet another 15-year cycle. And so I wanted to wrap up this one. And I took advantage of the COVID-19. I haven't been at sea for the longest time in my life, but fortunately I was to pour all that energy into the book and the TV show that airs tonight.
right. Yes. Here's what you wrote in the book. I highlighted this. I thought of the advice my father once gave me. To have many masters is to have none. In other words, if no single person or organization controlled me, I controlled my own fate. I needed to develop my own set of donors so I wouldn't be dependent on Woods Hole in this specific case. Here, I very much admire this. I've kind of structured my life that way so that I can just plot out my own destiny. I'm not dependent on some institution that's going to say yes or no. And this enables you to just kind of just take whichever paths you feel like. So I really like that. Now,
well, I think today's society is more supportive of a dyslexic person because you don't get a job, go for it 60 years and get a gold watch. You have to reinvent yourself over and over and over again. You don't want a master. You want to be that free agent. And look at our society now moving more into service industries, which are just a bunch of free agents. So yeah, I think it's more supportive of how we're wired. And so I'm hoping so, because then you can reap the benefit of the unique minds that are dyslexic.
I wanted to talk about the kind of the call of the sea and what's so appealing about the ocean. And in the context here, I'm going to read the opening passage of Cosmos, the original one, where Carl Sagan is standing on the bluff looking over the Pacific Ocean in Big Sur, which you've been to many times. And he writes, this is what he says: "The universe is all that is, or ever was, or ever will be. Our contemplations of the cosmos stir us. There's a tingling in the spine, a catch in the voice, a faint sensation as if a distant memory of falling from a great height. We know we are approaching the grandest of mysteries." And as he says this, waves are crashing. And there is something about, I'm in Santa Barbara, you used to live here. There's something about just going to the bluffs overlooking and just sitting there and just looking out. And I don't know what exactly it is that is so appealing about that.
I think particularly in California, which is what we call a high energy coastline, the waves are crashing. They're not just lapping up on the shore. There is something, particularly a person that, like I say, I'm ADHD, and I try to just bowl over things. And as you know, on my first expedition, we almost got sunk by a rogue wave that just was awesome. And I think it's the awesomeness, the wildness of the ocean that somewhat tempers my energy. I'm a very different person when I go to sea because I have great respect for the power of the ocean, and you don't boss it around. You have to go with the flow. Cousteau was one of my role models growing up, and I remember him saying, the Navy goes to war with the ocean, I make love to it. And I think that is such an apropos. As you know, his son lives right there in Montecito, Jean-Louis Michel, who's a good friend.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And I was just on a program with his brother's son, Philippe Jr. Yeah, it's an attitude about you have to make love to the sea. You have to make you go with it, it's also symbolic in that we all go through storms in life. All of us are going through storms in life, and the good news is they finally go away. And the key is not to sink during the storm. So I tell people, the storm, just keep rowing. It's sort of like Odysseus putting wax in his crew's ears while he listened to the sirens going through the clacking rocks on his way to the Golden Fleece. Life is a series of storms. And you saw the loss of my son. Wow, that had to be the worst storm in my life. But you row through it and you come out. The sun does come up. So the ocean is so metaphorical in that respect, in that we all are on our journeys, and I physically go on a journey, and I think a lot of people follow me because I'm on what we call the epic journey, and the epic journey begins with a dream. Mine was to become Captain Nemo, and then when you have your dream, there's certain consequences you need to now prepare yourself for the dream, and that means to study and get focused on what you're going to be doing, do your research, but then you go forth on your journey and you're tested. And there's two tests you have to pass. The first one is, did you prepare yourself for the journey? And that's the easiest one. The second one is, did you prepare yourself for failure? Because you're going to get knocked down. You just don't, it's not an easy trip. And the question is, do you get back up? And the only thing that gets you back up is your passion. So you have to pursue your personal dream, not your mother's, not your father's, not your friends, but your dream, because that will see you through. And then you attain the truth, what you were searching for. Neptune pulls back the veil of darkness, and there's the Titanic, or there's hydrothermal, or whatever you were seeking. But then you return to society and you share the dream. And the sharing process, which is the book and the TV show and the scientific papers, then releases you from that journey so you can go on the next one. And as my spiritual guru, Joseph Campbell, said so well, life is the act of becoming. You never arrive. You're constantly becoming. And I do that physically, but all of us are doing it in one fashion or another.
Yeah, I loved your discussion of Joseph Campbell. I watched that same series you watched with Bill Moyers, The Hero's Journey. And yeah, there is a kind of a graphic we can put over a life and think of it as a hero's journey. You go out, you have to suffer and sacrifice, but then you return. And you've done this like multiple times. It's almost like every one of your expeditions is like...
it is the process. I'm about to leave and do it again. It's the act of becoming. And each journey you evolve, hopefully, to a better person, more compassionate. You do all the right things by going through these multiple journeys that teach you something different about yourself and about the life you found yourself in. Every journey is different.
Yeah. I also think of the ocean as where we came from, where the life originated on Earth.
Mostly seawater in this body.
Yeah,
in fact, as you know, in the book, at the prologue, my mother calls and said it after they saw the talk shows, and she said, it's too bad you found that rusty old ship, because it wasn't the Titanic that was my greatest discovery. It was the hydrothermal vents. whole new ecosystem. And yeah, that's where we came from. We came from the sea, and we still carry it in our body.
Yeah, you complain a tiny bit about the narrowness of how people will remember you. Bob Ballard, oh yeah, the guy that discovered the Titanic. But that's just how it works. I mean, people have, very short memories, and, we pigeonhole people just for cognitive simplicity. Actually, it's a blessing, of course, because that opened up, many other doors for you.
Well, in fact, we've been talking for quite a bit of time, and it just popped up, didn't it?
Yeah,
in
exactly.
our discussion.
Yeah, I mean, but pretty much every famous person I know, they're always known by just one sentence. And of course, they're much more than that. It's just kind of the way people, I think about things.
How would you like to be Tony Bennett and get can you sing "I Left My Heart in
Right.
San Francisco"?
Right.
Or Yul Brynner, who did The King and I 1,200 times on Broadway.
Or
yeah,
Mick Jagger, who said Mick Jagger said he doesn't want to sing "I Can't Get No Satisfaction," like ever again, and he said that like 1970.
And he's probably sang it a few times since.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's okay because it opens the door to which you go, and we discover other things. It's fine. I mean, when they worked on the title, it was originally Into the Deep, but then they had to add by the guy who found the Titanic, and I went, all right, I got to live with that.
Right.
But
right,
what's really interesting about that is that it's my epitaph. I know when I die, it's the man who found the Titanic died today. So it's released me I can't beat it. So I'm going to go and do a bunch of other things. So it's sort of like I've got another lease on life.
All right, I have a dumb question for you. I'm going to read the passage from your book and then ask you my dumb question. Atmospheric pressure is always a factor to be aware of as you dive this deep. When sitting on your porch at home or walking down the street close to sea level, you have 1 atmosphere of pressure on you, or 14.6 pounds of force on each square inch of your body. Once you go underwater, there's another atmosphere of pressure on you for each 33 feet that you dive. By the time we get to 3,300 feet, we have 100 atmospheres, or 1,460 pounds, pressing on every inch of Alvin's hull from the outside. By the time we reach 9,000 feet, we have almost 2 tons of pressure on each square inch of the hull, enough to kill us instantly if anything goes wrong. But fortunately, our pressure hull protects us from calamity just inches away. Okay, I love these scenes where you're doing just that, and the camera points out the window, and there's a fish that kind of swims by. How is he not crushed? How is this possible?
No air. They have no air in their body. When you die swimming and you flood your nasal passage in your lungs, pressure doesn't make you a tiny person. You're just dead. But the body floats down because you're now pressure compensated. You're dead as a doornail, but you're no longer feeling pressure because you have no air in your body. And there's 3 states of matter: solid, liquid, and gas. And solid and liquids are unaffected by pressure. So that fish has a swim bladder, but it doesn't have air in its swim bladder. It has oil in its swim bladder. So it doesn't feel pressure. But what's really interesting, when I dove down to 20,000 feet in the bathyscaphe, I watched my viewport flow into the cabin because it's plexiglass. And plexiglass, people don't know, is a supercooled liquid. It's not a solid, so it can flow. And I'm watching the porthole come in about half an inch, and then I watched it go back out on the way back, and thank goodness.
God.
And I remember in one of the people that influenced me early in life was looking at National Geographic was William Beebe, who went down in a ball. And he was down there with his engineer, and he goes to wipe off the porthole, and the engineer told him, his name was Otis Barton, he said, Bill, on the other side of the porthole is the following tons per square inch. And he made this classic comment, because when you get close, your breath condenses on the hull. It gets foggy. And he said, I took out my napkin handkerchief, and I wiped off the water with a gentler touch.
Yeah, you don't want to take any risks there.
No, yeah, I'm just going to wipe you off gently. Don't get upset.
And then other dumb questions. Why does it take so long to get to the bottom? It's only a couple miles. Why can't your craft get down there
It's
faster?
coefficient of drag. The coefficient of drag has an exponential function in it. What that means is if I'm going 10 feet a minute with 10 pounds, to go 20 feet a minute, I have to add another 100 pounds. So you finally get where, see, we can't power down with our submarine because it's a golf cart. It's on batteries. It has very little power. So we have to just, like a diver who grabs onto a weight and jumps into the ocean relying upon this weight. So we put on the outside of Alvin weights, 250 pounds of weights on each side. And when we flood our air tanks, we get rid of all air that's exposed to pressure. We're now sinking at about 100 feet a minute. And then when we get near the bottom, we drop that first weight. And if everyone told the truth about their weight, which they never do, it stops. And so when we drop that weight and we keep going, who lied? We have an ability to vary what's called variable ballast system, where we can pump into a balloon oil, not air. We pump oil into a balloon and it makes us displace more water and we stop falling and we get neutral buoyancy. Then when we want to go to home at night, we drop the second weight and up we go. But we're going against the same coefficient of drag in each direction, and you reach a terminal velocity. You just can't go any faster. So that's it. That mathematics gets us every time.
The people who live in LA and complain about the traffic on the 405 commuting to work, they shouldn't complain. You have like a 2.5 hour each way commute.
Well, that's just to the average depth of the ocean. To go to, when I went down to 20,000 feet, 6 hours each way. That's why I could you zoom out for a second? I want to show them. That's why I got this toy here. This guy carries, not the other way. The camera went rogue. This is why I dreamed up robots, because I put them down there and they carry my spirit. They don't have to come up. So that was the big breakthrough, the moving away from physically doing the yo-yo trip in an elevator to putting the robot down and leave it down. In the movie Avatar, remember and Jim Cameron's a good buddy. There was a war veteran named Jake, and they wanted to infiltrate the Navis because they wanted to take all their minerals and all that. So there's a scene where Jake's in a room with a Navi laying next to him, and then they move Jake into the Navi and the eyes come on. You remember that scene? Do you remember what Jake did the moment he realized he wasn't in the Navi? What did he do the moment he realized he was not in the Navi? Most people can't remember that. He got up and ran out of the room, and they thought he'd freaked out. So they went after him and they said, are you okay? He says, I'm fine. Why did you run when you woke up in the Navi? And he said, I wanted the wind in my face again. You remember why he would have said that? Because he was paralyzed from the waist down. But here's my point. As soon as he woke up in the Navi and not his paralyzed body, and he saw he had legs, he didn't care. He was 8 feet long, blue-green, funny ear, and plugged a tail into a dragon. He ran. Well, that's my Navi, and I don't care if it's yellow or not. It carries my spirit. And in fact, the world, due to the pandemic, is getting a big dose in zooming and moving their spirits around. What we're doing right now in this conversation is primitive compared to what I can do when the ship goes on. When this room goes to the next level of zooming, in that I think I'm on the bottom of the ocean, and I'm not. But electronic travel is going to be a big byproduct of all the people becoming proficient in zooming. People aren't going to run back to the office even when they can and even when it's safe. Why? Avoid that traffic, or they'll come in late or whatever. But the point is, I now don't have to physically go there. I like going. I mean, I like riding horses. But I don't drive them to work. I mean, that's the whole idea of empowerment is now be given to the world to go wherever they want to go, and they get a phone bill instead of an airplane ticket and sitting in a hostile environment where someone attacks the stewardess or something.
Yeah, there's been a lot of that. World. Let's talk about a little philosophy of science, how theories get accepted. First I think of Darwin's theory of evolution, 1859, was accepted long before Crick and Watson cracked the DNA code, but natural selection as a process was enough to convince people that the theory was true. On the other hand, Alfred Wegener, proposed continental drift in the 1930s. And it wasn't until you guys started working on this, geologists in general, and you in particular in 1950s, 60s, where you gathered enough evidence for explaining what's the mechanism that could possibly push a continent. So talk a little bit about what the state of the science was in geology when you entered the field, to what extent plate tectonics was not accepted, and what it took for it to become accepted.
It was very not. I mean, first place, Alfred Wegener was a meteorologist, so he was dismissed outright. Well, how could he possibly know? Well, all he did was look at the world's map. Sir Francis Bacon, when they mapped the coast of Africa and South America, says, look, it fits together. So yes, there was two schools of thought when I was a student. I was taught to get an A on how mountains were made. So they said, okay, there was a theory called Marshall Kay's geosynclinal cycle was the name of it. And it started like this. You have a mountain, got it. Rain falls on it, got it. Dirt comes off the mountain, got it. Makes the river muddy, got it. Goes out into the ocean, got it. Falls to the bottom and creates mud, got it. And then a mountain comes up. Didn't get that last step, okay? Because it was wrong. I've always felt that when we figure things out, look at the equations that preceded E equals mc squared or F equals m. They were equations that ran all over the blackboard. If the equation runs for miles, it's not right, okay? So it's just not. If a scientist cannot explain to the average person the science, they haven't mastered it yet. So it's a work in progress. So plate tectonics is so elegantly simple. You got an Earth, got it. It's made up of pieces, got it. The pieces are called plates because they're thin like a plate, got it. The plates are moving around, okay, I can handle that. And they do three things. They move away from one another, okay, that's the mid-ocean ridge. You rip open the Earth, it bleeds its blood, forms new tissue. It's an organism. The Earth's a creature. And when you open it up, it bleeds, just like humans, bleeds its blood. Blood coagulates, forms new tissue. Got it. But then, because the Earth isn't getting any bigger and smaller, okay, when plates collide, one goes back in. So every up, there's a down. That makes sense. It's in balance. And then there's either not doing this or not doing this. They're doing a San Andreas fault, and they're sliding past one another. End of plate tectonic theory. That's it. And you can use those three motions and explain everything that you can see. You add one other, which is we have hot spots in our planet called thunderheads of the mantle, like Hawaii, where there's storms that bunch out and make islands. So that's the only guy off to the side. But you can explain almost everything. You can explain why the resources are where they are. It's just like someone gave us a Rosetta Stone, and I was lucky to be in that vanguard of students who got this new way of looking at the world. But I had a problem. Half my thesis committee didn't believe in it, and the other half believed in it, and my job was to get them to fight and get out of the fight and watch
the ones that didn't believe. What was their
but
objection?
We threw away the geology book. Beg your pardon?
What was their objection at that time to plate tectonics?
You want to know the real truth? I had one of them come up to me.
Yeah.
I had one of the objectionable scientists come up to me and privately say, I actually think this might be true, but I don't want to learn it.
What?
I'm too old in my career. I'm too ossified. He literally, moment of truth. I think it seems to be right, but I just don't want to learn it.
Interesting. Yes, that reflects
Yeah,
on
that's exactly what he said.
what's called the Planck problem. Max Planck was the one who made the observation that scientific theories proceed funeral by funeral. The old guys just have to die out, and the young Turks come up and accept the new theory. So the proposed mid-Atlantic ridge zone of emergence, where essentially new land is being created, that was theoretical until you actually went down and filmed it actually happening.
We went down and actually, well, it was originally theorized by geophysicists who look at things they're the big picture people. They were looking at gravity, magnetics, and the reversal patterns they saw in magnetic seafloor that turned out to be symmetrical. A seminal paper off the Juan de Fuca Ridge where they saw this pattern that was identical. And they figured that there's something generating the magnetics. We knew the Earth periodically reversed its poles, and we knew how long that period of north is north, or the North Pole is at the top, or the North Pole is at the bottom, as polarity switched. We thought the Earth seems like acting like a dynamo where it could flip its polarity. We knew the flipping pattern, and we knew how long they stayed flipped before they flipped again. But by roughly every 250,000 years it flips. We still don't know. Explain that one. We just know it does it. But then when we saw the lava coming out, it would come out in a liquid form, and it had little magnetite crystals. And those were like magnets that would align with the pole, and then they would lock up. So you could measure the polarity, but no one had actually gone down and got the rock and measured the polarity. So there was a theoretical explanation. When you see something, you make multiple hypotheses, and this one seemed to fit. And there was this seminal meeting I talk about at Princeton University where I was put in the pit as a graduate student to argue against the gods that we needed to do Project Famous and go out and do the field geology. Being a dyslexic, it's all field geology to me. I managed through the physics and did all right, but I really prefer the Mark I eyeball. And so I argued, get the eyeball down there and see if, in fact, the stuff's coming out and if it's obeying the theory. And we went down there, and it did, and out went the geology book. And then just a few years later, we found the hydrothermal vents, out went the biology book. And then we found the black smokers that explained that there's a second circulation system on the planet, where the entire volume of the world's oceans is going inside this mountain range, and the cracks caused by separation every 6 to 8 million years. Out went the chemistry book. So over a quick 10-year period, we threw out biology book, geology book, and chemistry book. And then I went after throwing away the archaeology book. So no, I love, because I'm dyslexic, I love throwing away books. No, that's not true.
Well, I guess just to our listeners explain what the kind of the history behind this. The theory was that because of the second law of thermodynamics and entropy, for a system to develop in complexity, you have to have a source of energy. The only source we knew of was the sun. So it all comes from the outside. Right. So what you're talking about here is there's a
photosynthesis, right?
Yeah. So here you're talking about a second source of energy inside the Earth.
Correct. And whether that's radioactive decay, but most of it is really the heat of genesis. After the Big Bang and the matter of the universe began to collapse back in on itself, it became a very violent collapse, very significant impacts. And it's like if you hit your hand for a half an hour, it's going to get really hot. And that's the heat of friction. And so the heat of accretion, as the Earth, which was initially cold material, coming back, collapsing in under the force of gravity, it then heated up that, and we had a meltdown. And when we had a meltdown and the Earth went molten, it then began to, through simple gravity, distribute heavy to the center. That's why the iron nickel core is heavy. And the Earth began to stratify itself. And the Earth is continuing to stratify itself until it loses that heat of genesis and it locks up like Mars. Mars went through what we believe a plate tectonic period, smaller planet, and that it gave up its heat of genesis and it's now locked up. So, but Earth is still alive, still a vibrant organism, and that's why it's still differentiating. Continents are growing. We know that continents are made up of lighter material. We call them silica, aluminum, potassium silicates, sile, and it's light. If you where we know ocean floor is made up of sima, silica mafics, iron and magnesium. So if you took a cubic foot of the continent, which typically is granite, for example, lots of quartz, lots of granite, lots of feldspars, and you put that cubic foot of granite on a waterbed, it would sink into the waterbed. But if you took a cubic foot of oceanic crust with its heavier minerals and laid it on the waterbed, it equilibrates at a deeper depth. That's why continents are up. They're floating higher on the asthenosphere, and the oceanic crust is sinking lower in the asthenosphere. And when the two go at it, the ocean always loses. They always loses. So the ocean is always subducting back into the planet. That's why all the oldest history of the planet is on the continents, and the ocean is relatively young, not because it hasn't been around for billions of years, but it's constantly been recycling itself, with the oldest remnant of ancient ocean crust in what used to be the Tethys, which is now the Mediterranean, as Africa and Eurasia collide, and going down the Hellenic Trench is the oldest ocean. It's about 250 million years. That's nothing out of the 4.8 billion year history. So yes, this that constant creative process, and it now all makes sense. I mean, we're able to understand why there are copper mines in Cyprus that drove the Bronze Age, because one of those black smokers that was being abducted was abducted. We call it an ophiolite. It was, instead of simple subduction, it splintered off a piece, and that piece went up into the overlying crustal plate, and that's the copper mines of Cyprus. It's an old black smoker.
Interesting. Do you think the evidence for the earliest origins of life are gone because they've been subducted in essentially the geological fossil record that we would find? It's gone. It's been subducted underneath and erased.
Well, no. I mean, it's certainly the bacterial. I don't think the archaean bacteria that we isolate is a very, very ancient bacterium. So I think the building block was the bacterium, and they're around. So no, I think it's just the evolutionary process brings in a competition, and that's what we're seeing through time. But that bacterium, those extremophiles, some people have argued they can survive on a meteorite if it's big enough, and can be carried to another body. And who brought the bacterium to Earth? Was that brought by Mars? Did Mars precede Earth as the parent of Earth? And when a big whack came off about 500 million years ago, and all of a sudden we went from the Precambrian to the Cambrian and the sudden appearance of complex life form, was that the trigger? And is that how planets reproduce? Because if you believe in the concept of Gaia, which I believe in, and a lot of Earth scientists do, that Earth is a organism, a creature, living symbiotically with all the other life on our planet, and now it's under threat by one species, us. Was the pandemic sent to get rid of us? I mean, is there a war breaking out between Earth and all other life on Earth and the human race? And if there's a war being broke out, I'm not concerned about the planet being around for billions of years. I'm not concerned about life being around for billions of years. I have great trepidation and not so sure the human race will survive this century. We are on a road to extinction that we're imposing on ourselves, and that's why we got to make peace with the planet and other life and say we were just kidding. Can we cut a deal here? And I think that's what we need to be able to do, or we're not going to make it. We're not going to make it.
Wow, Bob, you're sounding a little pessimistic. This has me worried.
No, I'm optimistic because, I mean, at the outbreak of the pandemic, we were pretty pessimistic. But you know what came out of the pandemic? A lesson in science. And I think what we really have seen, the public, maybe not 28% of them, but the vast majority of our public are getting vaccinated, and guess what's happening? And now we'll try to get the world, because we got to get everyone, because this guy's creative and constantly developing variants. So far, so good, but we could get a variant where we all got to get vaccinated again. So what they saw, remember at the outbreak of the pandemic, they were saying we wouldn't have a vaccine for 2 years, or maybe more than 2 years. Bingo, look what happened. So I think amazing. The public walking away saying, those scientists, yeah, they may be a little different, but boy, they saved the human race. So I think when we take in global warming and these other issues where all of the same things are happening, maybe the public will be listening a little more to scientists than they've listened to in the past.
I wanted to get your opinion on this book, The Deep Hot Biosphere, Thomas Gould's theory that living in the rocks are all these microbacteria that are so numerous they outweigh all other life forms on the surface of the planet.
Absolutely.
But he went further than that and said oil is not a fossil fuel; it's the byproduct of this deep hot biosphere. I remember that got a little play for a few months back in the 90s, and then I don't know where that went.
Well, the book you want to listen to that I just finished, which is The Nature of Nature by Enrique Sala. I mean, it is, he's a good friend. He was at Scripps, PhD in ecosystems, marine ecosystems, and he said as I wrote my scientific papers to tenure, which he got, he said I felt like I was writing the epitaph of the human race. And he left, and he started a program with National Geographic called Pristine Seas. And then he works with his colleagues to really explain the nature of nature. And it's a wonderful book. Being dyslexic, I naturally got it in audio. And I remember the second I finished the book, I called him and I said, Enrique, I want to be one of your disciples. It's a beautiful, elegant explanation of interdependency of all living things on the planet in a poetic way. It's almost like a religious book in that it's something you want to interview Enrique. He's an amazing individual. You want to read his book, The Nature of Nature.
Okay,
and then
I'm getting that.
Bring him forth, because he can explain all of this infinitely better than I can.
Another area where our worlds overlap a little bit is the Noachian flood. And I remember I read William Ryan and Walter Pittman's book, Noah's Flood, the new scientific discoveries about the event that changed history. Now, just let me give a little bit background, though. So what do you do with stories from the Bible? So you can take a Joseph Campbell approach and say, well, they're mythic stories. They didn't literally happen. They're stories to convey some moral homily or something like that. On the other hand, maybe some of them really did happen. So I'm always intrigued by this idea that, this biblical miracle is actually explained by this particular natural phenomenon, that volcano erupted or whatever. How do you think about, looking for evidence for Noah's flood because it literally happened or not?
Well, first place, I'd like to begin by having you read a book called Apocalypse by Amos Nur, who's a seismologist at Stanford. And he wrote a brilliant book reconciling all major events in the Bible to plate tectonics.
Really?
It's a beautiful book. Yes, it's a wonderful. Sodom and Gomorrah, is on the Dead Sea rift. And we know that that's like a San Andreas fault, a translational rift. We know that when it moves, you get a tremendous amount of hydrocarbons coming up that could then be ignited and destroyed. Sodom and Gomorrah sat on that very Dead Sea rift. The story of Joshua fit the battle of Jericho and ran around and blew the horn and the walls came tumbling down. That's right where you have major earthquakes. What he basically explains, and which I sort of sum up, is you can explain all major biblical events to science and plate tectonics. The timing of it, that's above, as he says, above his pay grade. In other words, when that earthquake that brought down Jericho happened, Why that very moment, he says, he points up, says, that's above my pay grade. But I can explain the event. You can explain the parting of the sea by in Noah's in Moses as he crossed the Sinai went from Egypt into the Sinai to a tsunami, because that's also in the Red Sea, in the Gulf of Aqaba or Gulf of Alaq, depends on your persuasion. You have a major San Andreas fault coming down. That Dead Sea fault goes all the way down to what's called a triple junction between the Red Sea, and you can have big earthquakes. And we know from all sorts of history, when you have a tsunami, the first thing happens is the water retreats to build the wave. And you can have shallow areas where it literally bears land. Timing. Did Moses show up just at the right moment for it to part and then get across, and then it comes in, and there goes the chariots of Egypt? Getting now more specifically to Walter Pittman and Bill Ryan's book, Noah's Flood, we all know that during the last glacial maximum, 22,000 years ago, 15 million cubic kilometers of ice was tied up on land. You had the massive glaciers. Ours was called the Wisconsin Ice Advance, where ice came all the way down to Long Island Sound, a mile high. That's a big pile of ice. We know that when that glacier retreated, first place, it didn't retreat. It melted faster than it was advancing. Glaciers don't go backwards, but the melting edge causes it to look like it's retreating. As soon as a glacier begins to stop advancing and retreating, it drops its load. And we know that glaciers are frozen rivers. They're big bulldozers. And there's a massive pile of earth and gravel and boulders in front of that. And as soon as that glacier retreats, it creates a giant dams. And we know that there were, during the what we call the Holocene transgression, when the ocean reclaimed the continental shelf that it lost during the Ice Age, that it went in steps. It wasn't a steady linear rise. It stopped 6 times. And those are global times. It was eustatic all around the planet. It wasn't just unique to the Atlantic and Pacific. They were all one bucket of water. And it stopped 6 times for several thousand years, and it jumped suddenly. Well, why did it do that? Jump suddenly, then it jumps. Those are the dams all around the world that are breaking, including the breaking of the dam at the Bosporus. So we know that there were these massive dam breaks and sea level rose. So when I went into the Black Sea, I was actually going in to look for perfectly preserved ships because it's anoxic. But see, anoxia is tied to the flood. So what happened was, you had the lowering of sea level, but as soon as you went past the 100-meter sill of the Bosporus, the Black Sea became isolated from the ocean. Okay, so now it becomes a freshwater lake, like the Caspian Sea. So it's fresh water. But then sea level starts to rise again, these breaking of the dams, and it's the Mediterranean and the Atlantic, or the Gibraltar is far deeper than the dam depth. So you had a very deep sill. So the Atlantic and Mediterranean were together. So as the Atlantic Pacific rose, so did the Mediterranean. So the Mediterranean is now advancing up into the Aegean, advancing up through the Dardanelles to the Sea of Marmara, and now it's right at the doorstep. Guess what's running right down the doorstep? The Anatolian Fault, a giant San Andreas fault. And that dam gets busted. And as you know, in Ryan and Pittman's book, they said the water had the hydraulic head of the world's oceans behind it. It shot in like a jet, and it flipped the ocean of the Mediterranean, of the Black Sea, which was fresh water, back to salt water. Because salt water is heavier, the water went down. So what happened was it turned over the water inside the Black Sea. And then it became what it is today, a saltwater sea. So I'm reading his book as I'm going in, and we had the first permits to get in. I said, let's go in and see if we can find the 6 shorelines, like everyone else has, Off every continental shelf are those 6 shorelines. One shoreline, not 6. One. Then I went along that shoreline and I walked the beach of that shoreline with my robots, and I picked up shells. So I picked up a bunch of shells, and I took them to carbon-14 lab at Woods Hole. I said, I want to carbon-14 date these shells. Sat and waited, came back. They said, well, you have a broad range of ages in your shells. Your oldest shell is 15,000 BPE, before the present era, and your youngest is 5,000 BPE, and shells in between. I said, thank you. I then took my shells to mollusk experts, and I said, tell me about my shells. They said, well, it's interesting. You have 2 kinds of shells. You have freshwater mollusk and saltwater mollusk. I said, thank you. I then plotted it, and everything older, 15,000 years to 7,500 BPE, were freshwater shells. After 7,500 BPE, saltwater. That was the flood. And that's roughly 5,000 BC in today's terminology, or other old terminology. So it told me exactly when it came in, and bing. And guess what? If you were interviewing Noah and his family afterwards, what happened? We had a flood. So where'd you go? We got an ark. We got in the ark. We went up and we came along land, and we got out of the ark. Okay. So where is the ark today? Well, remember their reference point of pre-flood was down under the ocean. Okay. They're going to point up. They're going to say, oh, it's up there. Guess what they're pointing at? Mount Ararat. Okay? It doesn't say the ark is sitting on the top of Mount Ararat. It's on the slope of Mount Ararat. That's where the sea level came in at. That's where, and they certainly did not leave it on Mount Ararat. My gosh, they built their new houses out of it. So the point is the one they found on, they claim they found on Mount Ararat is built by Byzantine monks in memory of the story. So the point is that what's their world back then? The Black Sea. They don't know anything about North America. Ask the Greeks about their world. They didn't know anything about the Western Hemisphere. So the point is it's a frame of reference. But there's flood stories. The Gilgamesh in the book begins in the story. That's the flooding of the Persian Gulf. Every ancient cultures have flood stories. We're just hung up on ours. Everyone's got them, because the whole world had the ocean pass through them violently once the dams were breaking all around the planet.
So the idea is that people in ancient times writing these stories or telling these stories in the oral tradition later get written down over millennia are really trying to reflect something that actually happened.
Yeah. I mean, I think all great mythologies are based in some sort of triggering mechanism. Something caused them. And like I say, Amos Nur does a beautiful job, again, far better than I, in his book, Apocalypse. He's pretty hard on ancient scholars about it because they don't want to face the facts. You know, it does, but he literally goes after major biblical events and nails it academically to plate tectonics. Beautifully done.
Interesting. All right, another area where our worlds overlap, Loch Ness Monster. Here you write, quote, if I navigated straight down
fun.
Yeah, totally. If I navigated straight down the long axis of the loch, the ship's wake would roll out toward the rocky walls on either side and bounce off of them. Long after we had passed, the 2 returning waves would meet back in the middle, creating a standing wave consisting of 2 to 3 humps that would last a few seconds and then disappear.
For a few seconds, yeah.
Could that be what people were seeing? Again, you're trying to scientifically test the idea that, well, there are no monsters living there because there couldn't be one Loch Ness monster. There'd have to be a breeding population over a long period of time. So what is it people are seeing? Well, they're seeing this lumpy thing. And so I love that approach, that you're trying to find a natural explanation for apparently supernatural or
well, you know, when you take these things, they have to obey the laws of physics. You know, like if God wrote anything, he wrote the laws of physics that are dominant throughout the universe. Those are a pretty good set of laws. So I always apply the laws. And in other words, taking physics, I as you know, I had a quadruple major, 2 majors and 2 minors and I had a minor in physics and mathematics, and they taught me to constrain my thinking to the laws of physics, which isn't a terrible constraint. So when I look at the world, I'm always passing it through that filter. So when National Geographic says, hey, you're between expeditions, let's go have some fun and spend the summer in Loch Ness, I said, sure, I'll pay the way. And so I went there, and they said, well, we wanted to look into this whole theory. And I said, well, let's read about the Loch Ness monster. The first sighting, I think, was in the 1500s. So if they're still seeing these monsters and they obey the laws of physics, it ain't the same monster. This is a great, whatever grandparent. So then you look at the, as you said, critical population to sustain a species, something like 25 creatures. So they got 25 of these monsters that are constantly having kids, and then they're dying. Okay, we know that because the loch is fresh water, it doesn't dissolve calcium carbonate, so all the skeletons of every monster that has ever lived should be on the bottom of the loch. Okay, we also know that the loch was completely glaciated during the Ice Age, just 20,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago. Solid ice. Okay, so there's not a plesiosaur. This is not some guy they swam in. No, this is a fairly young lake. Okay, to begin with, it's a fairly young lake. So then you know that it's been scrubbed clean of all its sediments. There's solid rock. In fact, so I said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to dredge. I'm going to bring in a boat through the lochs, and we're going to dredge the entire length of the loch and bring up whatever we can find. Supposedly, the living monster is so cool and smart, it swam away, but the dead ones can't swim away. So I'm going after the grandparents, great-grandparents. And I was bringing up clinkers. Now, you know what a clinker is? In the age of coal, long ago during the loch's history, they would burn coal in their steam-driven boats, and then they creates a residue, because coal's imperfect, of a residue that's solid as a rock, a lot of iron in it. And they would shovel out that stuff and throw it out of their boiler, because it would fill it up otherwise. And they're called clinkers, and they're molten-looking rocks. I was bringing up clinkers by the thousands. In other words, way back then, those clinkers were being thrown over, and I'm dredging them up. I should have gotten some bones. Didn't get a bone. Nary a bone. And I remember as we were leaving, and I was getting my last Nessie burger, because all along the loch, there's concession stands for the people looking for Nessie that sell hamburgers, and they call them Nessie burgers. And I was talking to the guy, and he says, so why do you hear? Well, we're checking out the theory. He says, we hope you don't prove it wrong, because I'll lose my business selling Nessie burgers. Right. And I said, don't worry. You can't prove something doesn't exist.
Yes, that's probably true, but here the story you just told is an example where the absence of evidence is evidence of absence. If it existed, the bone should be there. But they're not. Still 25%
of the population won't take the vaccine.
Well, that's right. Yes. That's a different problem.
Always those. No, same problem.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
I mean, we had a graduate student, I don't want to divulge his name, who turned in his thesis. And we smelled a rat. His curves were perfect. All his data, there was no deviation of his data. It was perfect data, and we said, not possible.
There's no perfect
data. He completely had fabricated all his data. You'll always have outliers. And everyone's, wants 100%. Doesn't happen, folks. So, yeah, there's always outliers. And there's always people that, won't believe that facts are just so overwhelming. They don't want to believe them. They don't want to believe them.
Yeah. I call this this is called the residue problem. There's always a residue of anomalies that the mainstream theory doesn't account for. And what do you do with them? You don't have to do anything with them. You assign a graduate student, try to figure it out. But we can live with the uncertainty. So like these videos of the UAPs and UFOs that everybody's talking about now, me and the ufologists who believe that they represent alien technology or whatever, we're agreed that 95% of all the sightings ever made over the last 50 years are accountable by natural explanations, a flock of geese and satellites and Venus and so on. So we're really only talking about 5% of anomalies that some people construct a whole new worldview out of, where scientists just say, well, I don't know. It's okay to just say, I don't know, and then live with it.
Well, again, it's the best we've got. Now, to their defense, I just talked about throwing away 3 textbooks. Science is a work in progress. I can't wait to find out what I don't know.
Right,
but my job right now at 79 is to hoist the next generation on my shoulders, and so they can see the things I can't see. And my grandmother, who's a big part of my life and her sayings, good woman from Kansas, said to me once, "Great is the person who plants a tree knowing they will never sit in its shade." And she attributed it to Johnny Appleseed. But that, she said, son, that's greatness. And I think that's our job as we get later in life, is to mentor and inspire, knowing you'll never know the outcome. I had that wonderful scientist at Scripps that got my letter when I was 17, Norris Rakestraw, and saying, dear Scripps, I want to be an oceanographer, dear Santa Claus letter. And he answered that letter. He had no idea what he launched. And I wish, he died way, way long time ago, before I gained scientific recognition with our discovery of plate tectonics, hydrothermal vents. The scientific part of my life that I'm very proud of, and my mother is even prouder of it than I am. Because
she should be.
The first of 13 generations. I'm the first of 13 generations to go to school, and so she was very proud of her son. Great.
Yeah, when you write somebody back, you never know how that's going to influence their lives. So I understand you're pretty good about mentoring people yourself. But let's talk about Titanic. You have made some of the greatest discoveries of shipwrecks. There must be thousands, I don't know, tens of thousands of ships sitting on the bottom of the sea.
3 to 4 million.
Is that
3 to 4 million?
Really?
That's the United Nations estimate is 3 to 4 million.
Over the last, 10,000 years or whatever?
Well, since we put things out that could sink.
Yeah, right. Why
Starting
the Titanic?
No.
I mean, to me, the Bismarck and the Yorktown, PT-109, those are all just as cool as the Titanic. But there's something about the Titanic. James Cameron's film is just one of the greatest selling films of all time. What is it about the Titanic that makes people so fascinated by it?
Well, it was a slow news day in the world. I mean, the Lusitania lost the same number of people. Beautiful ship. More people died. It's something about the Titanic that touches everyone differently, but collectively touches everybody. It's definitely little boys. Unbelievable. Most of my fan mail on Titanic come from little boys.
Really?
Although you get the people that were infatuated with the Edwardian era. I mean, the stars. Remember, America is a star-based system, for better or for worse. And we had all the stars out there. You had, the super wealthy were the stars of that period of time. You had the largest object in motion on the earth when the Titanic sailed. It was the largest moving object. So you had all of that. You had the captain putting the warnings in his pocket. You had all the band plays on. You had the Andrew who brought the guarantee group, because when they built Andrew was the builder of the Titanic at the White Star Line. At Harland and Wolff in Belfast. And there was a tradition on the maiden voyage that they would take the top people who were in the different divisions of Harland and Wolff to sail on the maiden voyage and hand over the ship to the operator. All members of the guaranteed group died at their watch. That noble thing. Then you had the owner sneaking into the lifeboat. You had villains. You had everything. You had Lady Astor pregnant with her child and Astor, John Jacob Astor, giving putting on her life jacket, calming her down, and then putting her in the lifeboat. You had the Strausses, owners of Macy's, a department store at that time. I can't remember. Strausses, big, wealthy people from New York. She gets in the lifeboat. He goes to get in. No, sir, women and children only. She then says, where he goes, I go, and she gets out and goes down with the ship. I mean, it's straight out of Central Casting. It's just phenomenal, the story of the human drama. It's the human race acting out on a stage for all to see. The unsinkable Molly Brown, a wealthy woman whose husband is a big mineral tycoon in Denver, Colorado. She gets in the boat. She goes down. She then sees that half the boats don't have anyone in it. She then brings. They go in and pick up the survivors. They're screaming and yelling. The crew's saying, if we go in there, they're going to overwhelm our boat, and we're all going to. No, you empty your boats into this one. We're going to go back in with an empty boat. I mean, wow. I mean, it just went on, and then I've added a new element to it that was discovered because I was on a top secret mission in the Cold War, which just adds another chapter to the Titanic.
Yeah. How about the hubris of the unsinkable modifier there?
They didn't say that. The White Star Line never said that. It was done by the press.
Oh,
that was
interesting.
unsinkable. It was never in their advertising. That's a bum rap for that. They did not do that. But the press called it the unsinkable ship.
Interesting.
They were wrong. The press can't be wrong.
So why did it sink? There's these different theories that the rivets used to hold the plates together were poorly done, or the captain ignored the iceberg warnings. The guys didn't bring their binoculars up on the watch. These kinds of what ifs.
No, it's simple. Why did that airplane what crashed into the Rocky Mountains, why did the airplane disintegrate? Well, it was an airplane. It crashed into a mountain. Okay, you get back to the physics. That the Titanic had a sister ship, the Olympic, an older sister ship. She had a younger one under construction that they were going to call Gigantic, and they renamed it the Britannic. But the sister ship, the older sister ship, the Olympic, made 500 crossings. Not a problem. Same rivets. Okay, so it just didn't run into an iceberg. So when you look at the inertia of rest, you got an iceberg, a monstrous iceberg. And as you know, 9/10 of it's beneath the sea. So you got a massive immovable object, like a mountain, but a mountain of ice. Now here's what happened. It was a moonless night. Okay, so normally when I've been at sea years, and in bad weather and you're near icebergs, you can hear them or you can see them, because you can hear it's like a shoreline. You can hear the waves crashing, and you're not even near any shoreline. So you can hear them. The second thing is bioluminescence. In northern latitudes, when you agitate those creatures, they glow. But on a moonless night, no horizon, flat calm, you can't hear an iceberg, you can't see an iceberg. And it just suddenly appeared. And then, fatally, when they spotted it dead ahead, and they called to the bridge, iceberg dead ahead, they attempted to avoid hitting it. And that was fatal, it turned out. Because by turning sideways, they took it with a glancing blow. See, the Titanic was stapled together, not welded, it was stapled with rivets. Fine rivets. There's nothing wrong with the rivets, but they're stapled. And when the captain told Andrew, go below decks and assess the damage to the ship, he went down and he just counted compartments. And when he got to 5, he went, done. Now, they were not watertight they were cups. So you had all these cups with bulkheads here. But if you flood 5, you bow down enough that it just becomes cast. So as soon as he counted the compartments, he immediately knew went back, the captain's going to sink. Had they gone, which their natural instinct instinct was not to. Had they gone head on in, they would have survived. There have been a lot of people that probably got killed going up against a bulkhead, but the ship itself wouldn't have sank. It would have crushed, they guessed, the first 3 compartments, but then it would have not sank. But by making that effort to avoid, they sealed their fate.
So to me, one of the most interesting parts of that whole story with you is that you were on a secret Cold War mission to find these 2 nuclear submarines. So just kind of walk us through that adventure. I mean, that's and also the realities of getting funding.
I wouldn't be sitting here. I wouldn't be sitting here were it not for the fact that the Titanic's here, the Scorpion's here, and the Thresher's here. So literally between the Thresher and the Scorpion, 2 nuclear submarines we lost was the Titanic. So I was actually trying to convince the Navy to build my new robots. And I got the Office of Naval Research, which is a research, to build a prototype. But I needed to get in the field with it, and there wasn't any money. So I went to the dark side of the world. I served in naval intelligence. I was on Army intelligence before that. I did a lot of missions during the Cold War, and most of them are still classified. And so it was not uncommon for me to be doing classified missions. And so I wanted to find the Titanic, but I needed a sponsor because I thought it would be a demonstration of our new technology. I wanted to prove that there was a new kid on the block and it wasn't going down in submarines, it was going in with robots. So I had the robot. I wanted to demonstrate to the world where there was a new kid on the block called remotely operated vehicle systems and the concept of telepresence. And I couldn't get NSF to fund it because they only fund the last paradigm. They're not good on the next paradigm. I've studied the art of paradigms, early adopters, acceptance, and then slow death to the next, like a staircase. So I knew that. I knew that history of why NSF never funds what I tell them to do. And I go to them and they say, the last idea you had was really cool, but this one. And so I prove that one, and then they go, well, that one was actually. So every time I go to them, they always turn me down. They constantly turn me down. Every 15 years, they turn me down. So anyway, I needed a sponsor. So I went to Admiral Thunman, and he said, I'll pay to test your technology if you do some stuff for me. So it was a deal. I'll fund you to go to sea if you'll do some things for me. And he was having me do things for him. So then sometimes we didn't have a national emergency. There wasn't. I said, what do we do when there isn't something awful that year? Well, we'll dream up something. So here we are. He said, well, we don't have any awful thing you need to do this year. But we have an issue with the Scorpion and the Thresher because we're thinking of disposing of nuclear submarines in the ocean. They're not their reactors, but they're nuclear containment vessels, which are monsters. And we don't know what they're going to do to the environment. And so we have 2 submarines that have been down there cooking for a couple decades. So we would like for you to go out and see what those reactors are doing to the environment. And number 2, in the case of the Scorpion, it has nuclear weapons, and we don't like leaving them around. So we need you to go and find the weapons so we can deal with that. And we also want you to see if the Russians have been there, because we knew from other experiences I can't go into, you can tell they've been there. Let's leave it at that. And the ocean is I can pick up an amphora that's been laying on the bottom it'll leave a dent in the bottom, and I can come back 20 years later, that dent's still there. So it's full of blueprints of activity. So all of that. But I said, well, we need a cover because we don't want the Soviets to put a satellite on me. Because we tell the Soviets where I'm going, and they'll put a satellite, because you can move satellites around, they have power. And we don't want you to lead them to our nuclear weapons. So we said, well, what about the Titanic? He said, yeah, it's cockamamie. He was a Rickover guy. He read me the riot act. Commander, that's the dumb. And he goes off on this rage about how stupid that is. Well, it turns out that it trickled through the food chain up to John Lehman, Secretary of the Navy, who then took it to President Reagan. And I didn't know at the time, because they told me later, that when they presented it to Reagan of this whole thing, he said, that sounds fantastic. Because if he does this with the Titanic, because he does it for the Scorpion, the Soviets are not going to know he did it. So we want to send a message, and Reagan was really big during the push of the final Cold War. It was just rubbing their nose in it. And he says, if he goes out and finds the Titanic and goes inside the Titanic, that's going to send it'll make us look bigger than we are. And a big part of winning the Cold War was making us look bigger than we are, where Gorbachev finally throws in his hand. And so that's great. So the word came down, the chain of command, let Ballard use that as a cover story. But it didn't get to Thunman right away. Lehman knew I was doing it. But Thunman said, well, if you got any time left over, you got to do my mission first. I'm going to embed in your team some of my, classified people that your team won't know they're intelligence officers. And we had 2 women because they naturally chauvinistic men thought the data logger was, secretary. She was an intelligence officer, and she knew who could get in the room and not get in the room. So all of that was playing out. And so I remember when I found the Titanic, after I did the Scorpion, I did my job. I did everything I was supposed to do. And they signed off, you can go, but I only had 12 days. So I had to dream up a way of finding it because I wasn't supposed to find it. The French were supposed to find it on the first expedition. I was supposed to film it. And they didn't find it. So now I've got this trip, and we don't know where the Titanic is. Thank you. Okay. And I've got a camera. And that's when my dyslexic brain went into full gear, and I dreamed up this way of finding it in the dark with a flashlight by its debris field. Just seemed logical. A lot of this is just Kansas common sense. And I dreamed up a way of looking for it in a very short period of time. And then Thunman was furious. And he said, Commander Ballard, your job was to look for the Titanic, not find it. And he thought when he went up to see Lehman on the carpet in the E-ring, he was going to be read the riot act, and Lehman just smiled. Says, that's fun. That's nice. So, yeah, it was quite a hoot. So I now can tell the truth, and it's in.
Are those nukes still in that submarine, sitting down there, and they'll be there forever?
No comment.
No comment. Okay, very good. Who owns the artifacts that are on the Titanic, and what are the legalities of?
That's interesting because I find it right, and I go to the court. I went down to the federal court, and I said, "So what's the deal?" And they said, "Well, they go back to 1600 Admiralty law. That's all they had on the books was Admiral. No one had ever done what I did. So now they had to look in the Admiralty law. And it says, well, here's how Admiralty law works. If you lose your ship and you retain ownership to it, it's yours. So if someone finds it, it's yours. You can cut a deal with them on salvaging, but you still are the owner. But if it's an abandoned shipwreck, then it's finders keepers. Whoever finds it, go out, prove it, come in here. So it turned out that when the Titanic sank, the insurance company paid off the White Star Line for the loss. But then the insurance company wrote it off their books as a loss. So then it became abandoned. So then the court said, look, I was going back out because I was going to practice going inside the Scorpion on practicing going inside the Titanic. So I had a follow-up cruise. So I said, when you go on your follow-up cruise and you have Alvin this time, I did the first one with the robots, couldn't recover anything, just pick up a cup. I have lots of pictures. Pick up that coffee cup that has White Star Line on it. Come to us, and you will become the owner of the Titanic under one condition of Admiralty law, the 16, whatever age it was, ancient law. You have to remove it from the bottom of the ocean. I said, why don't we remove it from the bottom of the ocean? It's a grave. It's in first place, you can't remove it from the bottom. Well, you have to attempt to remove it from the bottom of the ocean. I said, I don't want to do that. I said, it's like going to Gettysburg with a shovel. You don't go to Gettysburg with a shovel. You don't go to Pearl Harbor and take belt buckles off the Arizona. This is a grave. I mean, there's nothing to be learned. I've recovered ancient artifacts selective to identify the ship, but I left the ship there. We knew how many boiled eggs they had on the Titanic. We know how many bottles of oil. There wasn't anything to know by bringing up an artifact, because the sister ship, the Olympic, when she went out of service, they dismantled her and sold off everything, all the cups, the smoking room. I mean, they dismantled that ship. It's all in the collectors. You can go online. You can buy a coffee cup, or you can buy a plate. You can buy anything you want that's identical to what was on the Titanic. There's nothing down there that says Titanic. It says White Star Line. It's standard government or company issue plates. They're on all of their liners. So there wasn't anything to be learned from recovering artifacts. What are you going to do? So you're really capitalizing on some poor soul's disaster. And I just think that's totally inappropriate. So I didn't do it.
But could some treasure hunter go down there now, take some stuff, and then put it on auction?
Yep. There is a group that was started by a guy that had a Mercedes dealership in Connecticut, who formed a company and hired the French actually to go back and salvage it, because I refused to do that. And then they were awarded salver of record, but they can't sell them. They must put them on display. Now they're trying to maneuver around that law by declaring bankrupt. There's all sorts of, I don't even want to go down that dirt road. I don't even want to talk about it. It's not my favorite subject.
And the reason you couldn't bring the Titanic back up is because it isn't in one piece. It would just disintegrate if you tried to.
No, it's buried in the bow. The bow went in 90 feet. Good luck.
90 feet, right.
But also, I have a different philosophy about this. I just told you about my robots, okay? If you watch my ship go live on July 3rd. On July 3rd, I go to sea on the Nautilus, and we turn the satellite on, and this all becomes live. You can follow us 24 hours a day, all the way up to almost Christmas, because we broadcasted everything live. You enter our command center, and you go underwater with us, and you're talking to us. You can ask us questions. So here's the deal. When are we off Canada? I think it's in July. We're going to be working with Canada in July, because Canada has a plate tectonics problem. Canada has a subducting plate called the Juan de Fuca plate, created at the spreading center of the Juan de Fuca Ridge. That plate, the Juan de Fuca plate, is headed straight to the North American plate. Because it's oceanic, it's subducting. So it subducts right under Vancouver, right under Oregon, right under Washington is a subducting plate. And it's locked up. And we know what'll happen. It'll unlock. And just like we saw in Japan, Indonesia, 250,000 people, because when you have that sudden movement, in the case of Indonesia, 90 feet sudden movement, it sent out a shock wave that generated the tsunami that killed everybody. So we've been working with Canada, called Ocean Network Canada, to wire the plate with seismographs and a whole system of technology, so they get a 20-minute warning. So it wires ashore to University of Victoria, and they're listening for that to go, and they practice, and all you have to do is, fortunately, on the West Coast, it gets steep fast. Just get up go in a building, go up the third floor, and watch it go by. So we're helping them do that. But here's the point. We're installing, you can watch us in July, install an undersea robot called Wally. And Wally's actually tracked. It's got to be Wally. And Wally is tractored. And that ROV, get this, are you ready? Hardwired from thousands of feet beneath the ocean, hundreds of miles out to sea, hardwired to its operator in Germany, all the way one fiber.
Amazing.
Handoff. Speed of light. Okay, so here's the deal. What's running by the Titanic right now and was there before the Titanic sank? All our transatlantic cables, AT&T. We've got all those fibers, that Wally fiber, the one that's Wally's, goes right by the Titanic. Well, wait a minute. If we can operate Wally at a much further distance, why can't we operate vehicles? Why can't Hertz rent a robot and you can go around and look at the Titanic? We can actually build math surfaces, and we've done it in the past. A no, thou shalt not penetrate. Look at cars. Okay, don't go off the road. We now have the technology to let you rent robots. Within your lifetime and mine, which is not far off. You're going to go and rent a robot from Hertz and drive around the Serengeti and look at animals and get a phone bill. Because what we've done, I've actually installed. I've done. Here's what I did. I went off Monterey Bay, beautiful marine sanctuary, and I installed in a kelp forest, beautiful stretch of a kelp forest. Got my permits, and I put in 2 towers, and I ran a clothesline through the rainforest, underwater rainforest, through the kelp forest. I put a vehicle. Okay? I did a show with Alan Alda on it. And Alan was sitting here in Connecticut, and we went in a room, big room like this. And I said, okay, Alan, drive. And he just drove around and had a wonderful time, and he did it in Connecticut. That was 15 years ago. Okay, so we've been at this technology a long time. So the point is here's what happened when we put the robot. We put it on the clothes hanger so it can't get off the clothes hanger. You can't run away. Okay. We can run away, but we don't let tourists run away with our robots. So we put it on a clothes hanger, and it's looking down, so it doesn't see the clothes hanger. And you drive. So here's what happened. When we installed it, the fish all ran away because all the scuba diving and all this noise and and then we left. But now the camera's sitting there. And guess what happens? All gone? Are those humans all gone? Hey, okay. That can't hurt me, can it? No. Oh, it's here every day, moves around a little, doesn't do any harm. Well, let's get back to work. So in other words, it's now a spy, and you can reduce a human ocular distance to that big a scary thing. You've seen the programs where they put him inside an elephant-looking thing, and they walk with the... We're here. So the point is, you're going to sit there and say, Sarah's 10. Sarah, would you like to drive a Jeep in the Serengeti? Yeah, Dad, can I drive? Yeah, we're going to go. Oh, here we are, Sarah. Instantly, you sign up to Hertz with what we call end effectors. Ultimately, they'll look like humans, but you don't want something that looks like a human. The animals will run away. You have something that looks like them or something that's tiny, and you rent it, and you get a phone bill. No carbon footprint. You didn't get in a jet. You didn't have to check into a hotel. It's going to let the common person who can't take their private jet or have the wherewithal to pay $60,000 to go somewhere, and they get a phone bill, and they didn't do anything damaging. So that's the age of electronic travel. That's our future.
Yeah, we're coming here. I have a 5-year-old son. I think he may never drive.
So do it to the Titanic. So my point is, do it to the Titanic. Now, if you look at the Titanic right here, it has what are called, I call them rust sickles. They're actually a bacterium, but I never seen them before. So I call them, they look like a rusty sickle. So by the way, Oxford sent me a letter last year that said it's now official word in the English language.
I love that.
So, but it's really mostly hollow, and it's very small percentage of the iron. They're iron oxidizing bacteria. But in the bottom of the Titanic, it went in 60 feet. The anchor is almost hitting dirt.
Wow. The
sediment. So the anchor, it shows you that the ship is 90 feet into the bottom. It's anoxic. It's a brand new hull. That ship's not going anywhere. It's going to be around for thousands of years. What I've proposed doing, which they, again, said I'm nuts, is I said, let's go down here and let's clean off the rust like you do swimming pools. You can now get a roto-rooter that goes around a swimming pool. Well, they do it on big ships that We've plugged that enough, haven't we? Okay. We when they build super tankers and they can't take them out of the water, so they clean them underwater. They put a magnetic cleaner and it goes, cleans the whole ship away. And then they can paint. They can paint an epoxy paint. Go looking online. You can apply underwater and it hardens. So here's the deal. When I came in on the Titanic the first time in Alvin, what did I see? I came in low on the ship where it's sitting on the bottom at the bilge keel. I saw pink paint.
Whoa.
Now, why was it pink paint? Look at the Nautilus. You see what's little sticking out? It's anti-fouling paint. Okay? Well, who expected the Titanic to sink? So they only painted the part that they thought was going to be in seawater. If they had painted the whole ship with that paint, this paint was still working when I found it. So clean and paint the Titanic. Clean and paint it.
That's great.
It'll be around forever.
That's a good story.
You preserve history, don't you? You don't let Monticello rot. You don't let historical. So go down, pretty easy, latch on, run around, clean the hull, paint it, fine.
All right, Bob, I'm going to ask you about your most famous failure to find Amelia Earhart, another one of these places where our worlds overlap a little bit. I mean, the chances of her landing in one of those two tiny little islands, what is it, Gardner Island and Howland Island? You know, when you look at the map, it just seems, like truly a needle in a haystack. If anybody could have found it, it'd be you. But I just think that plane is at the bottom of the ocean somewhere, and no one's ever going to find it.
No, I would correct you on a couple of things. You used the word failure. Okay. When you're familiar with my Bismarck expedition,
yeah,
right? Did I find it the first time?
Nope.
And and naturally, National Geographic had a camera rolling at the time. And the producer puts a camera in my face like you're doing, like 60 Minutes does. And they said, "So how do you feel, Bob?" And I looked straight in the lens and I said, "Round one to the Bismarck, I know where it isn't." Okay.
Right.
Titanic, French and would you really want to find something where you went out and the first day you did it? I mean, you got to stretch these things out. So failure is only when you quit. We're going back. Geographic is sponsoring a second expedition.
You are?
Yep, you bet we are.
Whoa.
Of course we're going back. Now, why did I do Gardner Island, which has now been called, it's now called Nicomorora? Well, there's a real good reason why I did it. Number one, I was driving by it on someone else's nickel. See, I've been given a new job, and that's why I wrote the book and all this other stuff, is we've been asked by our government, we competed, I put together a consortium of institutions to compete for a contract with the federal government to map 50% of our country. Half of our country is beneath the sea. Yet we have better maps of Mars than half the United States of America. We don't even know what we own. So what happened when Napoleon came on over to Jefferson and said, "I picked a fight with Napoleon, and it didn't turn out well, and they want me to pay a war debt, and I need some money, and so I'll sell you the Louisiana Purchase for, I think it was $21 million or something like that, and a big hunk of change back then." And so naturally Congress was opposed to it because they said, go talk to the business sector and ask them, well, we're into cotton and we're into trading with Europe and sending them lumber, and why do we want to do that? So naturally the private sector was opposed. But Jefferson said, I got a hunch this is not a bad deal. So he buys it. And then what does he do? He gets Lewis and Clark, says, could you go out and find out what I bought? Sure, we'll go out. They did the historic Lewis and Clark because he doubled, think about it, when he acquired the Louisiana Purchase, he doubled the size of America. And then he went, found what he bought. So Reagan picks up a pen, and for the price of a pen, declares American sovereignty over all lands 200 nautical miles from its shores. Well, you remember, we've got a lot of shoreline, all Canada to Mexico, into the Gulf of Mexico, Canada again down to Mexico on the west coast. So we have the East Coast, Gulf, West Coast, but Alaska, North Slope, both sides. And then don't forget all the islands, the rocks we own in the Atlantic. We own, again, 50% of our country that we now own is under the sea, and we have better maps of Mars. So we competed and won this large grant to map and characterize, work with NOAA's Office of Ocean Exploration, and help them map and characterize what we own. And what we expect to happen is a complete change of the economy. Just like after the Lewis and Clark and the colonization and of the Louisiana Purchase, ranching, farming, minerals, vast resources were discovered that changed the economy, particularly when they found oil, changed the economy in the United States. So that will happen now, as they're now calling it the blue economy. There's a tremendous amount of potential economic wealth, but we have to then do it properly. So
that 200-mile boundary, does that apply to Hawaii?
Yep. That's a big, or Guam, or Northern Marianas, or you go online and type USEEZ. Bing. It's a vast amount of real estate. And we don't know what we own. So we won it. And so anyway, guess one of the islands that we mapped.
Oh, okay.
In 2019. Guess what's north of Nicomorora or Gardner is Howland, owned by the United States. What's south? This sounds like the Titanic, does it? What's south of Nicomorora? American Samoa. So we own these two dots, and we were driving by that one. There's two main theories. There was actually three, that she was turned around and landed and was captured by the Japanese and died in a concentration camp, but we don't work on land. The other one was that she missed Howland, went on. What's really amazing was when she told the bearing she was on, that searching for Howland was the bearing of all those islands, because it's a hot spot like Hawaii. So all those islands are on it. She gave that bearing, that I'm driving this bearing, because she missed Howland, and her navigator knew south was Baker, then Nicomorora, you go all the way down. So she knew there were islands this way. So she knew there were none north of Howland. So she knew her islands, the navigator did. So she's driving this one. So either one of two things happened. She tried to find Howland and ran out of gas and sank in the deep sea, or she continued searching and she came across Nicomorora, landed, and so there were two theories. Well, we were paid to drive past Nicomorora by the government because we were mapping. So National Geographic says we're going to rent you in between. But we only had in 2019 the ability to go to 4,000 meters, okay, which is 13,000 feet. The island is an island, so we had the depth. We could go on the island. We could explore off the island. So we had the technology in 2018 to check the box on that one, which we believe we checked the box. You see the show. It's on Disney Plus, Amelia Expedition. We pounded that one and put a lot of nails in that coffin. We went, okay. Then I sent the ship up right after that to make a map around Howland, because I wanted to go to Howland next. So we made the map. Map's all done. And now we're going to go back because we have to go back there anyway. But now I have more powerful technology. I have the technology to go to 20,000 feet, which I didn't have. So that's why I'm going now. You don't fail unless you stop trying. I haven't stopped trying.
Oh, it would be one of the great discoveries, short of maybe Jimmy Hoffa's body, wherever that is, to find her.
I thought it was in some football field under the goalpost.
Supposedly the New York Giants goal line, that didn't pan out. All right. So, last couple things here, Bob. Since you got personal in your memoir about the loss of your son at age 21, grief is such a terrible but realistic thing that we all have to experience. We lose our parents and so on. But to lose a child, I have two children, and to me, it's unimaginable. I just can't imagine how you go on. Just kind of walk us through a little bit about that. How do you pick yourself up and go on?
Well, you're not the same person, for sure. I mean, his death had a massive impact upon me because it made me question everything. And I went on a cruise shortly after that. And I took with me The Power Myth, Joseph Campbell. And because I was hurting and I was really angry. And I think, that's your natural reaction. Why? It's always that question. Why? Why me? Why him? And it never goes away. It's always right here. Always. Coming back frequently. I know why God gave me tear ducts. Cry. And it's cleansing to some degree, but it doesn't go away. And in fact, in the TV special that'll air tonight on National Geographic, he's interviewed, and I have never seen that interview. I finally looked at it because they showed me the show, but I refused to. It was an interview they did of Todd when we retreated to Montana after finding the Bismarck. He had been with me on the Bismarck. He had changed dramatically from an adolescent to adulthood. And he made I just saw it. And he talks about my children's program, the Jason Project, and how I continue to talk to kids.
I'm sorry you went through that.
Which I still do. So he isn't gone. I'm still talking to him.
Yeah. He's still there in your heart and your memory and your work and your life. And, what do you say to people that have lost somebody that's close to them? You just have to keep them alive in your heart. And
well, I think of all the people that just lost a loved one during the pandemic and they weren't able to say goodbye. That's the toughest. I mean, I've lost a mother, I've lost a father, I've lost a sister, I've been able to say goodbye. But when they just vanish, that's the toughest.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us here, and also in that film. It's quite moving, I have to say. It was a real tearjerker.
Well, I got to tell you, an interesting, and I talk about it in the book, was I came home because we were on vacation. He died, and I came back, and a couple came to our door and knocked on the door. I have no idea who they were. I have no idea to this day who they were. And then I opened the door, and there they are. And they say, "Can we talk? We've been down that road ourselves." And it was like angels. A good friend of mine, Ray Dalio, just lost his son. Every time I know someone who loses, I'm first there.
And
it's nice to know you're not alone.
Yeah. Yes. Well, that support system is important. You said it also broke up your first marriage. I guess that's just from the stress.
It's a surprisingly high mortality rate. because it's like you can't escape. I mean, yes, it has. Again, I hate statistics, but it's a very high percentage of families don't survive that loss.
Well, on the positive contingent outcome of that, you found your new wife, and your life just went down a different path. And
yep, I found my other half. And
so,
again, that I got that straight out of Joseph Campbell, the idea of finding your other half.
yeah,
And I found my other half because it's like having two eyes. They're equal, but they're different. And I see the world through my eye, and I'm pretty sure I know what I see. And I always find when I look at something, I ask Barbara, what does she see? And I'm always amazed that she's to be looking at something totally different. But she's right. But what's really wonderful about finding your other half is collectively you see in stereo. And so everyone should find their other half, whatever half it comes in, to get that separate perspective, because then you're enriched by that experience. People say, what's your greatest adventure? And I say, being married to my wife is my greatest adventure, because I just say, I can't believe you're seeing the world the way I see it. But now we know certainly dyslexics see the world differently.
yeah.
So you want to know what us dyslexics see so you can get your other eye.
That's funny. Well, and that wouldn't have happened had you not experienced that tragedy. So as a lesson, you just have to pick yourself up and keep going and see what comes that's positive after.
It's those storms in life that you just need to survive those storms, and the sun does come out.
All right, Robert, we're coming up on 2 hours. Let me just ask you a reflective question. We're about to colonize Mars. We may end up exploring the solar system and in thousands of years, explore other solar systems and so on. Is this our destiny as a professional explorer, as somebody who has that need to just get out there? Do you think that's kind of in our nature? That why do we do it? Because this is what we do.
It's in our nature to explore, but there's no plan B for the human race. There's no inhabitable place in our solar system. We know that. We can go to Mars and maybe they got some good trinkets up there or something, but it's ridiculous to think that we're going to move the human race to Mars. We can't even terraform the Gobi Desert. So, please, no, I can't wait. I'm helping NASA search for life on the moons of Europa and the Jovian moon of Europa and Enceladus of the moon of Saturn. And I'm confident they have big oceans, more water than ours. I'm confident they have volcanic activity. I'm confident there's going to be life there. It is not going to even get remotely close to what we have. I want to get it over with and say, yes, there's life off the Earth, but we're not going to leave the solar system. There's this funny thing about the laws of physics that as you approach the speed of light, you reach infinite mass. That really does a thing to your heart. Okay, so the point is, I do not see humans leaving our solar system. Because I've based myself on the laws of physics, and I don't see that changing. So don't think you can mess up Earth and get out of Dodge. It's the concept of Gaia, that Earth is a creature, and we're at war with it. We need to cut a deal. We need to clean up our act and say, look, we want to work with all life on this planet in a symbiotic way, or it will get rid of us. So do not think we can escape our mess. The greatest thing that came out of the space program is when the astronauts looked back over their shoulder and they saw this little blue marble in a black velvet void of nothingness. No, the universe became very finite.
Perfectly said. There is no planet B, as they say. And the blueness of that blue marble is your territory for exploration. Robert, thank you for your memoir.
I like the whole planet. I like the whole planet.
The whole planet, yes. Well, thank you for your work, your life's work, your memoir, your beautiful new book and documentary airing tonight. We'll drop this tomorrow morning so people can follow up on that. Of course, with streaming, you can watch shows, not just live, but also later, which is nice. So thanks for coming on and thanks for talking to us, Robert.
Pleasure.